And hello again, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and this is RT America. There is a saying in Miami. It goes like this. Let me share it with you. You know how you can tell there's an election around the corner? Because there's a politician who just came to town, and we can actually hear him screaming, "Viva Cuba Libre," and "Down with Fidel Castro." Many times a politician doesn't even know that Fidel Castro is already dead. Not that it would really matter, of course. But I digress. I say this because last night it happened again. On the eve of an election, with the clear intent of firing up the Hispanic conservative base, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton arrived in Miami and threatened more sanctions against Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba. Notwithstanding what you or I think of those particular countries with all their maladies, what Bolton did and what the U.S. is doing right now, more and more these days, actually has a name. You're not going to believe this. We just found this out. It's called the CNN effect. It's called the CNN effect. Seriously. It's so named by the Brookings Institute. It's a respected think tank that studies the use of sanctions, threatened sanctions, and the effect of threatened sanctions. By the way, here's how it defines it, okay? It defines the CNN effect, right, as a way of increasing the visibility of problems in some other country by stimulating the desire on the part of Americans to respond. In other words, they use CNN, right? They use CNN to play you, It's right there. I mean, CNN effect. Policy brief number 34. Can you imagine? This brief also goes on to state that most often these sanctions, quote, turn out to be little more than expressions of U.S. preferences that hurt American economic interests without, right? Hurt American economic interests without changing the target behaviors, changing the behavior of the target country for the better. Stop quote. I find this fascinating. I don't know about you, especially given what's going on right now. The era of sanctions. Our top focus tonight. This is RT America. Here's John Bolton last night. He's in Miami. He's firing up the Hispanic conservative base to go out and vote Republican, by golly.
The troika of tyranny in this hemisphere, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, has finally met its match. Oppressive regimes and ideologies, forces of oppression, totalitarianism, and domination. They worship a false god. We know their day of reckoning awaits. The Nicaraguan regime, like Venezuela and Cuba, will feel the full weight of America's robust sanctions regime. We will no longer appease dictators and despots near our shores.
The election is Tuesday, in case somebody was counting. So Bolton is threatening more sanctions on Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba. But the threat does not end there. Just listen to how many countries the Trump administration has now threatened with sanctions, even some allies in many cases. Here it is.
Iran, for many decades, has been the world's central banker of international terrorism.
Russia has been aggressive.
China! They're draining us, they're taking our money, they're rebuilding themselves.
The European Union, of course, was set up to take advantage of the United States, to attack our piggy bank, right? And you know what? We can't let that happen.
Canada, what they've done to our dairy farm workers is a disgrace.
And now this is the list of countries. We just did the research on this in case you wanted us to do it for you. We've got the information. These are countries in the world that the United States now have sanction or embargoes on. You ready? Belarus, Cuba, Eritrea, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, Russia, Burma, Cote d'Ivoire. I think I pronounced that right. If I didn't, please let me know. Congo, Eritrea, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Liberia, Libya, North Korea, not finished, China, Somalia, and Sudan. And wait, there's one more. This morning, the United States threatened sanctions against the entire international court. For more on this now, we go to Charles Ortel. He's a political commentator, and he's good enough to join us. And I can't help but wonder, as I'm reading this list, and I used the term earlier, whether this is Sanction-Mania. What's your response?
Well, I think that we need to remember there are 200 countries in the world, and you just listed about 15 by my count, maybe 20. It's sad that in that list, without picking on individual names, there certainly are countries run by aggressive dictatorial despots. In some cases, the United States has tolerated this behavior, and indeed some of those countries, Iraq was a country, for example, that we supported with enormous amounts of blood and treasure in the ill-advised Iraq War that began when it began there in 2003. So to see them now being under sanction, that doesn't speak well of the success of our foreign policy, certainly with regard to Iraq. So I take the point that sanctions very frequently do not work. But in the case of North Korea, I think that you have to say that Trump's more aggressive approach, or the Trump administration's more aggressive approach, certainly has brought our discussions with the leader of North Korea to a different place. Miles remain for us to get to real progress, but I would argue that sanctions have worked there. Where they tend not to work is with the bigger countries, Russia, China, and certainly, perhaps, if it ever gets to the European Union, won't work there.
I was reading this morning about some of the, what the Brookings Institute says. I don't know how you feel about them, but they do go on to say that for the most part, sanctions make a lot of noise, but they don't really show a lot of results in the end. Do you agree with that?
I think historically that has been true, but the United States, one set of data that I find very interesting and useful is put out by UNCTAD. It breaks down all the countries of the world, their economies by component, going right the way back to 1970. And what you see there is the U.S. market is very, very different than the market in any other country. It is gigantic. It is much bigger than the next, much bigger than China's consumption market. So what Donald Trump has at this moment, and things could change, is an enormous weapon. Around the world, we built too much capacity in industry after industry, in China especially. You cut off access to the U.S. market, it's going to hurt China a lot more than anything China might do vis-a-vis U.S. people trying to tap into their very small market compared to ours.
You know what a lot of people would ask when they look at this situation? They would ask, it's not a question of which countries you have sanctions against. It's actually more of a question of which countries you don't have sanctions against. Like, it's almost like we pick and choose based on what? You tell me. Economic interests?
Well, I'm sure you're going to ask me about Saudi Arabia, and there it is a very leaping ahead.
It's funny that you're asking yourself the question you knew I was coming back with. Well done, touche.
But in that instance, the relationship that the United States has had with the Saudi monarchy going back a very long time is a relationship that should be validly questioned, especially in 2018. Why does it make sense in 2018 to embrace monarchies as countries with which we want to build a firm future? Yes, it was attractive to see the young prince, and he may now not be the future king, but pushing his father and pushing his family to drag Saudi Arabia closer to where it should be, into, let's say, 1990 instead of 18 or 1690 or even earlier than that. Yes, that's refreshing, but on the other hand, do we know the real story of tortured relations between the Saudi interests and uniparty interests, frankly, Democrat and Republican, that have allowed this regime to do what it's done for so long to so many people?
Yeah, sometimes I don't know if it's a combination of irony or hypocrisy, but either one, it's always something that we have to be mindful of. Charles Ortel, political commentator, thank you so much for taking time to share some of your wisdom on this with us.
My pleasure.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.